The New Testament has 4 parts. Do you see them there? Gospels, history, letters, prophecy. There are 4 Gospels, 1 history, 21 letters, and 1 prophecy. The 4 Gospels record the life of Jesus. The 1 history, the book of Acts, records the spread of the message of Jesus. The 21 letters were written to communities of Jesus, like this one. And the 1 prophecy, the book of Revelation, describes the victory of Jesus. Notice the timeline down the left-hand side of your screen, unlike the Old Testament timeline that went across the top of your screen. The timeline here, the Gospels record the life of Jesus, who was born around 6 BC. Jesus was born before Christ, and he was crucified in the year AD 30. The history is the book of Acts, and it records the next 30 years, during which most of the New Testament letters were written. Paul died in AD 64. Peter died in AD 68. And John, the last of the apostles, died in AD 98. And by that time, the New Testament was completely written. Part 1, 4 Gospels recording the life of Jesus. Reading from left to right, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. The first 3 are grouped together because they're similar, containing the same basic storyline, recording many similar events in a similar order. Matthew starts with the great genealogy and ends with the Great Commission. Mark is the shortest of the Gospels. He's also the first one written, which is why he's located above Matthew and Luke. And 97% of Mark is included in Matthew and Luke, who used Mark as a source. Luke is the longest gospel and the longest book in the New Testament. Luke is the only non-Jewish author of the New Testament. He also wrote the book of Acts, which we'll get to in a moment. And then John is out there unique fonts separated from the other 3. It's a unique gospel that emphasizes the uniqueness of Jesus as the Son of God, recording the famous 7 I am statements by Jesus and the famous 7 signs or miracles performed by Jesus. Those are the 4 Gospels. Everything else in the New Testament happens after the resurrection. Everything else in the New Testament takes place after the resurrection. Part 2, history. There's 1 book of history, and it records the spread of the message of Jesus. It's the book of Acts, which was also written by Luke. And as I mentioned, he's the only non-Jewish author of the New Testament who wrote more of the New Testament than any other author when you combine Luke and Acts together. Let's do an acronym for Acts. The A stands for the ascension of Jesus back to heaven in chapter 1 of Acts. The C stands for the church, which is born in the 2nd chapter of Acts. The T stands for the 2 people around which the entire book of Acts can be outlined. Peter in chapters 1 through 12, and Paul in chapters 13 through 28. And then the S stands for the spread of the gospel. The point of the book of Acts is the spread of the gospel from Jerusalem in chapter 1 all the way to Rome in chapter 28. The book of Acts ends in the city of Rome. What's the next book after the book of Acts in the New Testament? The letter to the Romans. It's an easy way to remember that. It's the book of history, the book of Acts. 3rd category. This is the hard one. This is the big one. This is the long one. Part 3, the letters. 21 letters in the New Testament written to communities of Jesus, just like ours. Let's start with Paul's letters. Paul's 13 letters appear not in the order they were written, but in order according to length, longest to shortest. They fall into 2 categories, those written to churches appearing above the dotted line and named after the location, and those written to individuals appearing below the dotted line and named after their recipients. Paul wrote to 7 different churches, some of them more than once. Romans, remember, Acts ends in the city of Rome. The next book is Paul's letter to the Romans, which means it's also Paul's longest letter. There you go, because they're arranged according to length. Let's keep the R with Romans. The R for Romans stands for release and righteousness. In Romans, we are released from slavery to sin becoming slaves to righteousness instead. Paul wrote 2 letters to the Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Let's take the C from Corinthians, and the C stands for church. Corinthians regards church questions and answers about church stuff. Church questions and answers regarding matters like baptism and communion and spiritual gifts and worship services and pride and division, just like churches still struggle with today. After Corinthians, we go eat popcorn. We go eat popcorn. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Go eat popcorn. Galatians. The G of Galatians is the gospel of grace. If you want to know the gospel, you turn to Galatians. It talks about the gospel of grace. Ephesians has 6 chapters divided evenly. Chapters 1 through 3, God loves us. Chapters 4 through 6, we love others. Philippians, let's take the P from Philippians, and it stands for persecution. Persecution joy is the letter to the Philippians. Can you experience joy even while being persecuted as a Christian? Paul's answer, the letter to the Philippians, persecution joy. Yes, you can. And Colossians. Colossians is the sister letter to Ephesians, written probably about the same time with much of the same content. I don't want you to ever think about Colossians without thinking of Ephesians, and never think about Ephesians without thinking of Colossians. They are sister letters. Go eat popcorn. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. After you eat popcorn, you need to drink tea, a lot of tea. 5 teas in a row. The only teas in the New Testament, and they happen to be in alphabetical order. 2 letters to the Thessalonians, 2 letters to Timothy, and 1 letter to Titus. Let's consider them each in turn. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians deal with excellence and expectation. 1st Thessalonians talks about Christian excellence. 2nd Thessalonians talks about the expectation in Jesus' return. Excellence and expectation. And now, crossing the dotted line, we move into the letters from Paul written to individuals after whom they are named, but we're still in the middle of our 5 T's, right? 2 letters were written to Timothy. And these letters define church leadership. If you want to know about church leadership, you turn to 1st and 2nd Timothy. It is a manual on church leadership. And then Titus. Titus teaches that right beliefs lead to right behavior. Right beliefs lead to right behavior. 5 T's. Paul's first and last letter in the New Testament both deal with a common theme. Do you remember what it is? Slavery. They both deal with slavery. Romans, though, deals with spiritual slavery. Philemon deals with literal slavery. Philemon was a Christian slave owner. The letters of Paul. Sorbet, my favorite flavor of ice cream. Sorbet, is it a New Testament book? It is, but it's written backwards here, floating in the middle of the letters. It's the letter to the Hebrews written backwards. Why is it written backwards? Because Hebrews is a warning. That's a critically important word for Hebrews. There are 5 famous warning passages in the letter to the Hebrews. It's written backwards because it's a warning to those who were thinking of going backwards, thinking about turning back from following Jesus Christ. Its location in the New Testament shows that nobody knows what to do with the book of Hebrews. They just stuck it in between Paul's letters and the general epistles because we don't know what to do with it. Hebrews. And then the 7 general letters written to unspecified general audiences. That's why they're called general letters, because their audience is unspecified in general. They're named after their author. Paul's letters are named after the recipients. The general letters are named after their author. And the order of these general letters is according to the importance of the author in the first century church. James, Peter, John, and Jude. James, Peter, John, and Jude. The first and the last were half-brothers of Jesus, James and Jude. Okay? They wrote 1 letter, 2 letters, 3 letters, and 1 letter, respectively. Let's look at them in turn. James wrote 1 letter. It's about faith and works. Peter wrote 2 letters. The first letter is pain with a purpose. The second letter is poisonous prophets. John wrote 3 letters. Remember, of all the apostles, he lived the longest in the flesh. His letters are about Jesus coming in the flesh and loving one another in the flesh, practically. John, who lived the longest, wrote the shortest 2 books in the Bible, 2nd and 3rd John. And then Jude. Jude, another half-brother of Jesus. He repeats many of the warnings from 2 Peter 2. The middle chapter in 2 Peter is largely repeated as the letter of Jude. Those are the 21 letters. And then finally, final section, one book, the book of prophecy, describing the victory of Jesus. It is the revelation of Jesus to John. And it's Jesus' future final victory over all evil, and there is no S in Revelation. It's not Revelations, it's Revelation singular.